The polished chrome of my brother's prized sports car was the first thing I saw when I pulled up to my house. It shouldn't have been there. It was a cold November morning, and Leo was supposed to be in a meeting with a potential investor across town, a meeting I had personally arranged for him. I had just come from that same investor, confirming the final details of a deal I had spent 6 months structuring. I was the architect of my family's future success, the one who worked in the trenches of finance, while my older brother Leo played the part of the charismatic heir. I'm Ethan. In my family's construction empire, there was a clear hierarchy. My father, Jacob, was the king. My older brother Leo was the crown prince, destined to inherit the throne. My younger sister, Olivia, was the beloved princess, and I was the middle child, the workhorse. My father didn't believe in formal titles for me. He just called me the engine. It was my job to make the company run, to secure the deals, to manage the numbers. While Leo glad-handed clients and took all the credit, I had accepted my role. I knew the rules of the game, or so I thought. Seeing Leo's car in my driveway was a glitch in the system, a data point that didn't belong. There was no logical reason for him to be at my house, at this time, with my wife, Sophia. I entered the house quietly. The silence downstairs was heavy, unnatural, and then I heard a sound from upstairs, from our bedroom. A laugh. Sophia's laugh, but different. Higher, more unrestrained than I was used to hearing. And then another laugh, a man's laugh, low and smug. Leo's laugh. My mind, trained to process information and calculate risk, went into overdrive. I pulled out my phone, not out of anger, but out of instinct. I switched on the video recorder. Data was everything. I climbed the stairs silently. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I saw a scene that ripped the foundation out from under my world. My brother and my wife, together in my bed. I didn't storm in. I didn't shout. An enraged animal makes mistakes. A cold-blooded predator waits. I held the phone steady, recording, my mind already calculating the fallout, the potential leverage, the cost-benefit analysis of what came next. After a few seconds, I pushed the door open. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, deliberate movement. The silence that followed their shocked gasps was absolute. Sophia scrambled to cover herself, her face a mask of horror. Leo, on the other hand, recovered quickly. A slow, arrogant grin spread across his face, the same smirk he gave me when he took credit for a deal I had closed. He wasn't ashamed. He was triumphant. "Ethan," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're home early." Before I could respond, the front door opened downstairs. "Ethan? Sophia?" It was my father's voice, followed by my mother's. They had planned to drop by, a surprise visit. The timing was a catastrophic coincidence. What happened next was a blur of chaos and betrayal that would define the rest of my life. My parents came upstairs, drawn by the commotion. They saw the scene: Sophia in tears, Leo pulling on his clothes, me standing there with a face like stone. I expected shouting, accusations, some semblance of justice. I was wrong. My mother rushed to Sophia, comforting her, whispering that it would be okay. My father looked at me, then at Leo, and his expression was not one of anger, but of weary resignation. "Ethan," he said, his voice low and firm, "let's not make this a public spectacle. We'll handle this as a family." "Handle this," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. He was in my bed, with my wife. My father sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated pragmatism. "Leo is the future of this company," he said, as if that explained everything. "He is the heir. Scandals are bad for business. We need to contain this." "Contain this?" I looked around at the faces of my family. My mother was now leading a sobbing Sophia downstairs. My sister, Olivia, had arrived and was staring at me with a mixture of pity and fear. No one was looking at Leo with condemnation. They were looking at me as the problem, the one who was disrupting the family's carefully constructed image. The final, devastating blow came from my father. He pulled me aside, his grip on my arm like steel. "I know this is hard, son, but you need to understand the bigger picture. You are a valuable part of this company, but Leo is the face. He is the one who will carry the family name forward. It's time you accept your place. My place. The engine. The workhorse. The man who builds the empire so the king's son can play in it." In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It solidified. It turned from flesh and blood into something cold, hard, and sharp. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of the room, past my sister's averted gaze, past my mother coddling the woman who had betrayed me, past my father, who had just valued the company's stock price over his own son's soul. As I walked out the front door, I heard Leo's voice, a triumphant laugh directed at Sophia. "See? I told you it would be fine." I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was leaving. I left the city, left the state, left everything I'd ever known behind. That night, sitting in a cheap motel room hundreds of miles away, I made a vow. My father told me to know my place, and he was right. My place wasn't as a loyal engine in his machine. My place was to build a bigger machine, a more powerful one, a machine that would one day come back and devour his entire empire. I left. I went to New York with $500 in my pocket and a fire in my soul. I earned my MBA at night while working in the hell of Wall Street during the day. I learned to fight not with fists, but with stocks and contracts, with leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. I found allies who valued loyalty and rewarded competence, not bloodlines. I founded my own investment firm, a small, lean, hungry predator in a sea of sharks. And for 10 long years, I waited. I watched my father's company from afar, studying its financials, its weaknesses, its vulnerabilities, like a predator stalking its prey. And then, when they announced their decision to go public, to sell shares on the open market to fund a major expansion, I knew the time had come. My father had opened the gates to his kingdom, never imagining that the wolf he had exiled 10 years ago was now standing right outside, ready to burn it all to the ground. My family made their choice. They chose the heir over the engine, the image over the truth. That same night, Sophia moved in with Leo. I was told not to make waves, to accept the new reality for the sake of family harmony. My father's words echoed in my head. He is the heir. Deal with it. My sister Olivia, ever the pragmatist, was even more blunt. So she had sex with your brother. So what? She just upgraded. Get over it, Ethan. They saw me as an obstacle, a minor inconvenience on the path to a smooth succession. I watched from a distance as they welcomed Sophia into the family, celebrating her pregnancy with Leo's child as if my marriage to her had never existed. My divorce was a footnote, a logistical necessity to clear the way for their new, perfect arrangement. I was still invited to family dinners, not because they wanted me there, but because my presence maintained the illusion of a united front. As long as I showed up for work and kept the engine running, my feelings were irrelevant. My last Thanksgiving with them lasted exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The air was thick, with forced smiles and unspoken contempt. They showed me the door, and as I stood on the cold pavement, I made 2 vows. First, I would leave and never again consider these people my family. Second, one day, I would return and burn their world to the ground. 2 weeks later, my absence began to register not as a personal crisis, but as a business problem. "Where the hell is Ethan?" My father, Jacob, roared in his office. A major project, one that was supposedly Leo's responsibility, was a month behind schedule, facing a $50,000 penalty for rework. The Geraldson project is Leo's, not Ethan's, Olivia pointed out, entering the office. And besides, I haven't seen or heard from Ethan in 2 weeks. He's not answering his phone. He knows damn well he's supposed to cover for Leo on this, Jacob shouted. Find him. Tell him to get his ass back to work. But I was gone. Olivia's frantic texts and voicemails went unanswered. She drove to my house, only to find a cleaning crew preparing it for new tenants. She had to report back to our angry father that the family's engine had not just stalled, it had been ripped out completely. Are you telling me he abandoned his family? Jacob screamed. Olivia's reply, which she later told me about, was the first crack in their fortress of denial. No, she said softly. I think he finally realized his family abandoned him. I didn't join the army. My war wasn't going to be fought in a sandbox with guns and explosives. It was going to be fought in the glass and steel canyons of Manhattan, with capital and contracts. I arrived in New York with nothing but $500 and a hunger for retribution that burned hotter than any furnace. I got my MBA at night from NYU, sleeping 4 hours a night and fueling myself with cheap coffee and pure, unadulterated rage. During the day, I worked in the brutal, unforgiving world of mergers and acquisitions on Wall Street. I wasn't rebuilding infrastructure. I was learning how to dismantle it, piece by piece. I learned to fight, not with fists, but with spreadsheets and stock options. I learned that in the world of high finance, loyalty wasn't about blood. It was about performance. I found allies who saw my drive not as a character flaw, but as an asset. The most important of them was Isabella. She was a brilliant, ruthless corporate lawyer, a woman who could dissect a 100-page contract and find the single fatal clause that would bring a whole company to its knees. She saw the fire in my eyes and recognized it as her own. We became partners, first in business, then in life. Together, we founded our own boutique investment firm, a small, lean predator designed for one purpose: hostile takeovers. And for 10 long years, I planned. I watched Johnson Construction, my family's company, from afar. I analyzed their quarterly reports, their market strategies, their debt-to-equity ratios. I knew every weakness, every over-leveraged asset, every incompetent executive my brother had hired. My sister, Olivia, became my silent, unwilling accomplice. She had stayed behind, disgusted by our family's hypocrisy, but trapped by her loyalty. Over the years, she saw Leo's arrogance and mismanagement slowly erode the empire our father had built. She started feeding me information, small things at first, then entire project files, not because she wanted to help me, but because she wanted to save the company from him. She was my inside woman, my secret asset. And then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. To fund a massive, ill-advised expansion, my father and Leo decided to take the company public. They were going to sell a significant portion of their shares on the open market. They were opening the gates of their fortress, inviting the world in, never once imagining that the wolf they had cast out was now the one leading the pack. The IPO was my declaration of war. It was time to go home. I sat in a darkened town car across the street from the headquarters of Johnson Construction, watching my former family arrive for their unscheduled board meeting. I couldn't help but smile. They had no idea what was about to hit them. They thought this was just another formality, another meeting to rubber stamp Leo's latest disastrous decision. They didn't know that for the past 3 months, my firm, in partnership with several other investment groups, had been quietly, methodically, buying up every publicly traded share of their company on the open market. It was a classic, creeping takeover. We stayed just under the 5% ownership threshold that would require public disclosure, using a network of shell corporations and allied funds. My family, arrogant in their majority control, hadn't even noticed. They were watching their stock price rise, thinking it was a sign of market confidence in their IPO. The fools. They were celebrating the rising value of the rope that was about to hang them. My sister, Olivia, was the last to arrive. She looked stressed, unhappy. For the past few years, she had been the only sane person in that boardroom, fighting a losing battle against Leo's incompetence. Her mood was about to change. She glanced across the street, and for a second her eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of confusion, but she didn't recognize me. 10 years on Wall Street had sharpened my features, replaced the last of my youthful softness with the cold, hard angles of a predator. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. Olivia was in a bad mood, not because of the meeting, but because of the company's performance. As the unofficial CFO, a role she held without the title because our father would never give a woman that much power, she knew they were bleeding money. She knew Leo's expansion plan was a catastrophe. But she also knew she was powerless. The family controlled the board. The board of directors was a joke. It met once a quarter to approve decisions that had already been made around the family dinner table. The agenda was always the same. Read the minutes, review the financials, approve whatever Leo wanted to do next. My father, Jacob, as chairman, would call for a vote. He, my mother, Leo, and Olivia controlled 48% of the shares. And then there were my shares, the 12% that had been sitting dormant for 10 years. They had always used my shares via proxy, assuming my vote belonged to the family. After 10 years of silence, they simply took it for granted. That assumption was about to cost them everything. The meeting began. The old, boring rituals, the reading of the minutes, the glossing over of the disastrous financial reports. And then, the main event, a vote to approve a massive new line of credit to fund the next phase of Leo's failing expansion plan. All in favor? Jacob asked, his voice booming with unearned confidence. He, my mother, and Leo raised their hands. Olivia, 36%. Olivia, to her credit, abstained. All opposed? That was the cue. A woman at the end of the table, an unassuming brunette who represented a small, unknown investment fund, raised her hand. On behalf of Northwood Capital, she said, "We vote no. We also wish to call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the chairman, Jacob Johnson, and the CEO, Leo Johnson, for gross mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty." The room went silent. My father stared at her, dumbfounded. Leo actually laughed. "Who the hell are you?" he sneered. "You own what, 1% of the company?" "Actually," the brunette said, a small smile playing on her lips, "Northwood Capital and its associated partners currently control 39% of the publicly traded shares of this company." Pandemonium. My father was on his feet, shouting. Leo was beet red, sputtering about a hostile takeover. Olivia just sat there, her mind racing, finally understanding that something much bigger was happening. "It doesn't matter," Jacob roared, regaining his composure. "Even with your 39%, the family controls 60%. The motion is defeated." He turned to Olivia. "Olivia, cast your vote and Sam's proxy vote so we can end this farce." But before Olivia could speak, the boardroom doors swung open. I walked in. 10 years had passed, but they recognized me instantly. I saw the shock on my father's face, the hatred on Leo's, the dawning realization on Olivia's. I walked to the head of the table and took my seat. "The proxy vote for Ethan Johnson is no longer valid," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I will be casting my own vote." I looked from my father to my brother, savoring the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times. On the motion of no confidence in the chairman and CEO, Ethan Johnson, representing 12% of the company's shares, votes yes. The math hung in the air, heavy and brutal. At 39% from the outside investors, plus my 12%. That made 51%. We had control. In the stunned silence that followed, the brunette, one of Isabella's top lieutenants, took charge. With a majority vote of 51%, the motion passes. Jacob Johnson and Leo Johnson are hereby removed from their positions, effective immediately. I now nominate Ethan Johnson as the new chairman of the board. The vote was a formality. From that moment on, the meeting moved at lightning speed. I was appointed chairman. Leo was summarily fired as CEO. The brunette was installed as interim CFO, replacing Olivia, who would be moved to head of operations, a role she was actually qualified for. We never bothered with employment contracts in our family. It was all based on trust and blood. So, there were no severance packages, no golden parachutes, just lead weights. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal effects from your offices, I announced, my voice devoid of emotion. Security will escort you out. As for the company cars and houses, they are company property. You have 1 week to vacate the premises. I looked directly at Leo and Sophia, who had been living in a lavish company-owned mansion. All of you, except Leo and Sophia, they have 24 hours. My father, my mother, Leo, they just sat there dumbfounded as the company they had built and then taken for granted was surgically dismantled before their eyes. They were still majority shareholders in name, but they had lost all power. Any other questions, I asked, taking charge of the meeting. Yes, Isabella said, entering the room with a stack of documents. She was the absolute goddess I'd met in New York, a vision in a charcoal power suit, her emerald eyes sparkling with the thrill of the kill. SRJ Enterprises, she announced, has made a buyout offer for all available shares. She passed the documents around. The offer is $120 per share for the first 51%. After that, any remaining shares will be purchased at a price of $2 per share. The room erupted again. My family stared at the papers, their faces ashen. All their wealth was tied up in the company. In 5 years, they had planned to cash out as multimillionaires. Now, they were facing financial ruin. Olivia, always the quickest, stood up. I'll sell, she said, looking not at me, but at the documents. She understood the game. I watched as my father and mother, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fury, were forced to sign the papers, selling their legacy for a fraction of what they thought it was worth. Leo refused, shouting about lawyers and lawsuits, but it was useless. His shares were now practically worthless. After they had all been escorted out, the boardroom was quiet. It was just me, Isabella, and our new executive team. Isabella walked over and stood behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. They're asking to speak with you, she said, begging for a meeting. I swiveled in my father's old chair, looking out the window at the city skyline he had once commanded. Tell them I'm busy, I said. I'm designing the future, and in my new design, there's no room for the past. My father had told me to know my place, and he was right. My place was at the head of the table. The week that followed the boardroom massacre was a masterclass in controlled demolition. My family, stripped of their power and prestige, reacted exactly as I had predicted. My father, Jacob, roared about lawsuits and betrayal, his pride wounded more deeply than his bank account. My mother retreated into a state of shocked denial, unable to process how the perfect family image she had curated for decades could shatter so quickly. And Leo, my brother, was a caged animal. He spent his 24 hours of grace not packing, but making furious, useless phone calls, trying to rally support from allies who no longer answered. He and Sophia were escorted out of their mansion by security, a final, humiliating exit. They all gathered at my parents' house, the old family fortress that now felt more like a bunker. They were planning their counterattack, a legal war they were destined to lose. They didn't understand yet. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a hostile takeover. executed with surgical precision. They had no lawyers, because the best corporate law firms in the city were already on retainer with me, or with firms allied with mine. They had no capital, because their wealth was trapped in now worthless shares of a company I controlled. They were kings without a kingdom, generals without an army. Meanwhile, I was busy rebuilding. The company, which had been teetering on the edge of bankruptcy under Leo's mismanagement, was undergoing a radical restructuring. Isabella and her team of lawyers were cleaning house, terminating the incompetent executives Leo had hired and renegotiating the disastrous contracts he had signed. Olivia, finally free from her brother's shadow, was thriving. I had promoted her to chief operating officer, and she was already streamlining operations, cutting waste, and restoring the morale of the employees who had suffered under Leo's reign of arrogance. She was proving what I had known all along. She was the real heir, the one who had inherited our father's talent for building, not just his name. One evening, a week after the takeover, Olivia came to my new office, our father's old office. "They want to talk," she said, her voice tired. "All of them. They think if they can just appeal to you as family." "I don't have a family," I said, not looking up from the financial report I was reading. "Ethan, please," she said. "I know what they did, but they're broken. Leo is a mess. Dad just stares out the window all day. Maybe it's time to show some mercy." I finally looked at her. "Mercy?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Did they show me mercy when they chose him over me? Did they show me mercy when they told me to know my place? They didn't want mercy. They wanted compliance. And now they're getting consequences. I paused. "But I will see them. Not for them. For you. Set it up. Here. Tomorrow." The next day, they filed into the boardroom where their world had ended. My father, my mother, Leo, and Sophia. They looked smaller, diminished, out of place in the sleek, modern space I was already renovating. I sat at the head of the table, in the chairman's seat. Isabella stood silently by my side. My father spoke first, trying to summon his old patriarchal authority. "Ethan," he began, "this has gone far enough. You've made your point. You've humiliated us. Now it's time to end this. We are still your family." "No," I said, my voice cutting through his. "You are not. A family is a structure built on mutual trust and support. What you had was a corporation built on nepotism and convenience. And it was a poorly run one." "This is about Sophia, isn't it?" my mother chimed in, her voice trembling. "You're punishing all of us for one mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "That wasn't a mistake. That was a business decision. She chose the heir apparent over the middle manager, and you all ratified that decision. You chose the company's image over justice. You chose him," I said, gesturing to Leo, "over me. Every single one of you." Leo finally snapped. "You son of a bitch!" he snarled. "You stole my company!" "Your company?" I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. "You never built anything in your life. You inherited a title. You played at being a CEO while I did the actual work. I didn't steal your company, Leo. I bought it. In a free and open market that you were too arrogant and too stupid to understand. I just happened to be the one who saw the rot in the foundation before anyone else." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "You all told me to know my place," I said, my back to them. And for 10 years, I did. My place was in the shadows, learning how the real world works, learning how to build something so powerful that it could swallow a company like this without even noticing. You wanted me to know my place. Well, now you will know yours. I turned back to face them. "As of this morning, SRJ Enterprises has completed its acquisition of all remaining shares of Johnson Construction. The company, as you knew it, no longer exists. Its assets will be absorbed, its brand retired. Your shares are now worth $2 apiece, enough for a cup of coffee. I let the silence hang in the air. I saw the final flicker of hope die in my father's eyes. But, I said, I am not without a sense of irony. I looked at Leo. I have a job offer for you, a construction site in Siberia. We're rebuilding some old infrastructure there. It's hard, physical labor. The pay is minimal, but it's a job. It's more than you deserve. I then looked at my father. And for you, Dad, a position as a consultant, unpaid, of course. You can sit in a small office in the basement and write memos about how you would have done things differently. No one will read them. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. Get out, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Get out of my building. They left without another word. As the door closed behind them, Isabella came and stood beside me at the window. That was cruel, she said softly. It was necessary, I replied, watching their small, defeated figures exit the building far below. They needed to understand that the old structure is gone, demolished, completely. She put her hand on my arm. And what about Olivia? I turned to her, and for the first time in a long time, a genuine smile touched my lips. Olivia, I said, is my new partner. We have an empire to build. I looked out at the city, not as the exiled son, but as the new king. My father was right. I had finally found my place. It was at the head of the table. The week that followed the boardroom massacre was a study in desperation. Stripped of their titles, their company cars, and their identities, my former family gathered at my parents' house, a once proud mansion that now felt like a gilded cage. I didn't need spies to know what was happening. Olivia kept me informed. They were in a state of shock, cycling through the 5 stages of grief with chaotic speed. Denial was the first stage. They couldn't believe it had happened. They spent hours poring over the company bylaws, searching for a loophole, a technicality that would undo the vote. There was none. I had Isabella, the best corporate lawyer in the country, design my strategy. It was airtight. Anger came next. That was led by my father, Jacob. He roared about betrayal, about the ungrateful whelp who had stabbed his own family in the back. He called every lawyer he knew, trying to mount a legal challenge, but no one would take his case. They had either already been retained by me or were smart enough to know that going up against Isabella was professional suicide. He was a king with no army, a general with no soldiers. Bargaining was Leo's territory. He tried to reach out to the board members who had sided with me, offering them positions, power, anything to flip their votes. He didn't understand that these people weren't moved by empty promises. They were professional investors, and they had already placed their bet on me. They saw his desperate attempts not as a negotiation, but as confirmation of the incompetence I had just removed. Depression settled over my mother. She spent her days weeping, mourning not the loss of her son, but the loss of her social standing, the perfect family image she had so carefully constructed. And Sophia, the catalyst for it all, was now just a disgraced appendage to a failed prince, trapped in a house with a family that secretly blamed her for everything. Finally, they reached the 5th stage, a desperate, misguided attempt at acceptance, which they framed as a plan. Olivia described the scene to me over the phone. They were all gathered around the dining room table, the same table where my fate had been sealed 10 years ago. "We need to fight back," Jacob had declared, his voice a hollow echo of its former power. "We need to take back what is ours." "How, Jacob?" my mother had asked. "We have no money, no lawyers. Where do we even start?" It was Leo who, in his infinite arrogance, came up with the idea. "I'll go talk to him." he'd said, cracking his knuckles. It's time I put my little brother back in his place. Even Sophia, who had hitched her wagon to his star, saw the folly in that. I wouldn't do that, Leo. She'd warned. He's not the same person. He looked different, stronger. Then Olivia, ever the voice of reason, had made her own suggestion. Maybe we should just talk to him, apologize, beg for mercy. The room had exploded. Beg! Jacob had roared. I will never bow to that ungrateful bastard! After what he did, Leo had shouted. Hell no. They spent the rest of the evening shouting, blaming, and plotting a war they had already lost. They didn't get it. They still thought this was a family drama. They couldn't comprehend that this was a business transaction, and they were on the losing end. The final confrontation came a week later. Not from them, but from me. I summoned my father to my new office, his old office. He came alone. He walked in, looking smaller, older, a relic in a world that had moved on without him. He looked around at the new, minimalist furniture, the sleek technology, the bustling energy of the new team visible through the glass walls. What do you want, Ethan? He asked, his voice rough. I didn't ask him to sit. I remained standing by the large window, looking out over the city. I wanted you to see this, I said quietly. This is what a successful company looks like. Not a family dynasty built on entitlement, but a meritocracy built on talent and hard work. You destroyed us, he said, his voice cracking. Your own family. I turned to face him, my expression unreadable. You destroyed this family 10 years ago. In my own living room. You made a business decision. You decided that the heir was more valuable than the engine. You decided that preserving the company's image was more important than protecting your own son. You taught me a valuable lesson that day, Dad. What lesson? He whispered. That loyalty is a liability, I said, and that everything, even family, has a price. You just miscalculated the cost. He sank into one of the chairs, defeated. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. I already have everything I ever wanted. I have the company. I have a team built on respect, not blood. I have a partner, I said, as Isabella entered the room and stood by my side, who values me for what I build, not for my last name. And I have a sister, I added, nodding towards the door where Olivia stood, who finally has the chance to prove how brilliant she really is, without having to stand in her brother's shadow. So why am I here? He asked, looking up at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in his life. Because I wanted you to deliver a message, I said, my voice cold and final. Tell Leo the job offer in Siberia is still open. Tell my mother that the society charity balls she loves so much will no longer be accepting donations from a company she has no affiliation with. And tell Sophia, tell her nothing. She is irrelevant. He just stared at me, speechless. You told me to know my place, I said, walking back to my desk and sitting in the chairman's chair. And I do. Now, it's time for you to learn yours. I picked up a pen and signed a document, not even looking at him, as I spoke the final words. Get out of my office. He left without another word. As the door closed, Isabella came and stood behind me, her hand resting on my shoulder. Olivia walked in and stood beside her, a small, determined smile on her face. The three of us stood there for a moment in silence, the new architects of a new empire. I looked out at the city, at the endless expanse of buildings and opportunities. The past was a demolished structure, its rubble cleared away. Now, it was time to build. Months turned into a year. The name Johnson Construction was now just a footnote in financial history books, a case study in hostile takeovers taught in MBA programs. SRJ Enterprises, under my chairmanship, didn't just survive, it thrived. with Olivia managing operations with ruthless efficiency, and Isabella navigating the complex legal landscape of our new acquisitions. We built an empire that dwarfed the small kingdom my father had lorded over. We didn't just take over his company. We absorbed it, improved it, and made it 10 times more successful than he ever could have imagined. My old family faded into obscurity. My father, stripped of his title and his purpose, withered. He and my mother lived out their days in a smaller house, subsisting on the meager payout from their shares, a constant, bitter reminder of the son they had underestimated. Leo, unable to handle a life without privilege, drifted from one failed venture to another, his name a poison in the business community. Sophia, I heard, left him within the year, vanishing back into the anonymity from which she came. They were ghosts from a past I had surgically removed. My relationship with Olivia was rebuilt, not on the broken foundations of our old family, but on a new ground of mutual respect and shared ambition. We weren't just siblings, we were partners. She had found her place, not as a princess in a crumbling castle, but as a queen in a new empire. One evening, Isabella and I were standing on the terrace of our penthouse apartment, looking out at the glittering city skyline. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked, her voice soft. I thought for a moment, watching the distant lights. "I think about the lesson they taught me," I said. "They taught me that in business, as in life, you can't build a lasting structure on a weak foundation. You can't sacrifice integrity for image. And you can never, ever underestimate the engine." She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "And what about revenge?" she asked. "Is it as sweet as they say?" I looked at the city, at the tangible proof of my victory stretching out before me. "Revenge isn't sweet," I said. "It's just balanced. It's restoring order to a system that was out of alignment. It's a correction." She looked up at me, her green eyes reflecting the city lights. "So, what's next for the great Ethan Johnson, the Wolf of Wall Street?" I pulled her closer, my arm wrapping around her. "Now," I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "Now we build." My father had told me to know my place, and he was right. My place was at the head of the table. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you. And go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.